Okay, we're coming back to you live with our podcast, In Your Best Interest. Today we're going to talk with Mary Maloney and Andrea Jones about our favorite topic. Some attorneys discuss legal fees, some don't. So we're going to rip through legal fees and what that is like, what you can expect, and hopefully give you a better understanding about the frustrations and pain points of legal fees, and certainly kind of the do's and don'ts to preserve your money and keep it in your pocket and don't give it to the lawyers. So, Mary, why don't you kick us off?
All right. And you are Attorney Justin Sisemore, correct?
Oh, I am?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm Justin Sisemore. I'm that guy.
All right. So when people talk to an attorney, one of the first questions they ask is how much is it going to cost me? Of course, because we all want to know that. But attorneys do have different answers. Some are a little bit more murky about what they say. So how do people get an accurate estimate of legal fees is what we want to know. And my first question for you, Justin, is, some attorneys are less transparent when it comes to their legal fees. So we want to talk about why that happens. They're trying to lure clients in, but can you explain what's going on there?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting to me is that attorneys are like the one organization in the world, at least in our space in family. I'm not speaking for every firm out there, where they seem to think you can't estimate pockets of what you're doing. Okay, if you can't estimate now, granted, we're not clairvoyant. We don't live with your spouse. We don't know how they're going to react to all situations, and we certainly don't know how you're going to behave through the process. I have some people that I think is going to be a very simple case, and it turns very not so simple in a short period of time because of actions or inactions that they take throughout the course. So there are always, in any business or any estimate, outliers on both sides, on the plus and minus side. I've had $30 million cases that end up being, $5 or $10 grand, and I've had cases where people don't have any real assets, but they just go at each other's jugular that, can get into the six figures if you're not careful. I'm not a huge biller personally, so my team does a good job of billing. But what I am is I'm very observant, and I very much am in tune with kind of the costs of the process and the time that goes into that. So part of the thing that I look at, especially in the initial retainer, is what's it going to take to get to the next step, okay? And in divorce, it's a little bit easier than some other areas of law because you can compartmentalize your temporary orders, which is your first stage, your discovery, second stage, your mediation, third stage, and most cases resolve in mediation. And I'll tell that to every client that calls to do a consult. So, you should be able to break down what those stages look like. And I don't really understand the concept of how we can't get a good, inside of several $1,000s of what that's going to look like. Now, what makes that hard is, well, Justin, if you can gauge at each step, then how come you can't tell me within several $1,000s of the whole thing? The short answer or long answer is there are various things that happen throughout the course of litigation that are in our control and outside of our control. So like we talked about, personality, whether somebody's willing to settle, whether they really just love some piece of art so much that they don't want to part with it, so they want to charge you $1 million for it. I mean, those are things that you kind of really can't gauge until you get into the arena with them. But certainly from a standpoint of time that goes into and preparation that goes into a temporary hearing, for example, you're not going to have most likely more than a couple of hours in preparation for a temporary hearing from a lawyer's perspective. Now, some lawyers, I guess, when they wake up, they think about your case. They put that thought process down in the hourly. I would run from those people, and you're going to know inside of about the first 3 months what that looks like. So when I quote somebody a $7,000 or $10,000 fee, or $4,000 or $5,000 fee, that's based on, okay, we need a temporary hearing, we might need some extraordinary relief. This is a bigger case, so we're going to need to go get some financials. Maybe we're going to need some subpoenas that go out to some third-party witnesses. And so I'm really just thinking in smaller increments or compartments there. So when a client asks me about the overall costs, when I tell somebody, well, discovery is usually $4 or $5 grand. The temporary orders hearing is usually $5 to $6 grand. Why is that? Well, I know that we're getting timelines. I know in the beginning stages, we're getting a lot of the information, together, assimilated. We're sifting through a lot of stuff that doesn't matter. And so, I can tell people within steps and stages what that looks like. So I just don't like when I hear people say, well, the attorney just can't guesstimate what it's going to be. I tell people all the time, I had a contractor do that to me, doubled up the cost and doubled up the time, and I am not interested in doing that to people. And I also, I told you this would be a short answer, right?
Right.
Yeah. I also see a lot of firms
Liar.
that it looks like, I'm like, if you can't scratch the surface of something and they're just like, well, I'm going to get this person in for $1,500 or $3,000. And I see that all the time. A client calls me and they say, well, my retainer was only $5,000. And I'm like, this is like a really nasty case. And I never quote super high retainers for multiple reasons. One, it allows potentially for the other side to go equalize if you've got a divorce case. And I may not want you to equalize, right? But when you've vastly underestimated, or you're just, in my opinion, it looks like you're trying to get the client on the hook. And I can't stand that because people can't prep for that. And so,
and I think that as a client, when you hire an attorney, when you're looking for an attorney, you need to ask those questions. And you're always, when you break it down, and somebody's like, oh, I don't want to know the whole process. I don't understand the process. But the process is important to understand, because once I understand what steps there are and what is involved in each step, then I'm not surprised anymore what the cost is. Because if I don't even know what a discovery is, for example, and you just run through this as an attorney and say, well, this is going to be temporary orders, and then there's going to be discovery, and then there's going to be mediation, and I have no idea what those terms mean, and you quote me maybe whatever, $10,000 for the case, then I'm going to be like, whoa. And then across the street they say $3,000, but they don't say anything about what that all entails and how far I'm going to get. That's why we said before in other podcasts, you need to ask more questions and say, well, what does discovery even mean? Or even better, do your research first before you do the consultation. So I have a basic understanding. When you say discovery, I know what that means. And then when you say it's going to be this much, well, based on how much property I have and how much, whatever, in bank accounts I have and investment accounts, that's probably true, because there's a lot of documents we need to go through.
Yeah.
You be prepared, because then I think legal fees, if you break it down, it's not going to be as shocking or as crazy and thinking the lawyer is going to pull one over on you. No, they're actually telling you the truth instead of running blindly into something. And then every month they're asking you for more money, and it ends up being more than what you anticipate.
Yeah, I like to put a really good estimate on it, and in most cases, we start out retainers between $5,000 and $10,000, which is a lot of money for people to come up with. And there are resources out there for that, but that help with lending and whatnot. But the big thing there is, if I've got a client that's in control of a lot of the information, I know that what I need right away financially is not a huge number, right? If I've got to go out and get an expert to go trace down and chase down all these corporate accounts that have been shifting, it's a totally different figure. So even if I quote a lower retainer, $7,500 or $10,000 for a big case, and the other side quote 50, and I'm like, I know I'm going to get to 50, but we don't need to get to 50 today on that kind of case. To me, it's a matter of understanding that so that the client's not parting ways with their dollar, all of it, and so they feel trapped, right? First of all, every attorney has a duty to refund any unused portion, and I write tons of checks every single day in refunds. So sometimes I overshoot, but I'd rather the client get used to the monthly costs and about what it's going to be to estimate where they need to be, than the client that goes, I need to come up with $10,000 more, and it's just like anything. You get more experience, you know how to estimate better. And so that's part of it.
Right. And it's all about that transparency. So briefly, can we talk about what kind of questions people should ask the attorney when they're getting an estimate?
Yeah. So I think I'm going to flip that one on you a little bit, because I think that the attorney should be a gauge of what the client's expectations are within the confines of reality. And what I mean by that is, if you are interviewing a client and they're just like, oh, we just get along fine and everything's just wonderful and we've got everything resolved, the attorney's job is to know what questions to probe into that statement, which is probably completely factually wrong, even though that may be the goal, and to probe in to ask those questions. And it's not scare selling. It's like, okay, well, have you talked about the educational rights and where you're going to live and how we're going to do these dual households? And do you really understand what it is that you're asking for on temporary relief? And really diving into that. So it's not the client saying to me, well, how much does this cost and how much does this cost? I can give them very, very good direction based on their honest feedback on what they think they're going to ask for and how they think they're going to get it. So if you've got the client that literally I walk into court and they haven't provided any documentation, they haven't provided any of their summary documents, which most of the time, if it's our case that we're the petitioner on, we move the hearing. Otherwise, we're just going in and flying by the seat of our pants. So in those situations where a client has the ability to get that information to you, you can really get a good gauge about where they're going to be from a standpoint of expectation. And, you know, I think it's wildly different when you have one party that has not been the primary caretaker of a kid or doesn't have any understanding of the business to think that they're going to go in for $5,000 and sell houses, divide up retirement, get a custody case, do temporary orders hearings, negotiate with their spouse who they've never been able to negotiate with, add an attorney in the mix who probably is going to be a little bit combative at some point in time, deal with judges and their schedules, courts settings and all that stuff. It's just not realistic. So if you just want to be told this is cheap, well, you're going to get a cheap lawyer. You're going to get somebody that's full of what we know they're full of.
Yep, you get what you pay for once again. Yep. So, I mean, I think just the questions to ask, because not every attorney is like you. I mean, some are going to just tell them this is your, $1,500 retainer up front, but they're not going to explain it.
But even understanding what a retainer is.
Right.
Retainer is not your case.
Right.
A retainer is basically a bucket of money that is sitting there that the attorney pulls money. That's the dummy version. It's probably the legal version.
No, it's
but
good.
it's basically a bucket
It's a bucket of stuff.
where you pull from, and it needs to be replenished.
Yeah.
And when it's empty, guess what is empty, and you don't replenish it, then the attorney has the right to pull from the case. So that's even understanding what a retainer is, because people I think mix that up all the time.
That's an example of what I'm talking about. Like attorneys don't know until the client asks sometimes if they do it over and over again. I mean, I'm sitting there like retainers, it's a retainer. But that's not an easy thing for people.
Oh, trust account. What is a trust account? I don't know what that means unless I do my research or I ask the question.
Yeah.
I need to we have that too in a law firm. We do it the way that they pay a retainer, and then we do a monthly withdrawal on their account or their credit card to kind of replenish that. And again, if it's kind of like a savings account that you have sitting there, and then if the case is over, it's a nice sitting money that you get back if the case solves faster or solves better than what you expect. But I kind of expect every month to be replenished. People still don't understand what that means. Why are you billing me another $500? We're not billing you. We're putting money into your legal savings account that you can then use to pay the legal fees. And those kind of explanations need to happen, because otherwise...
Yeah, I think, Mary, to your question, like what question should I ask? Well, if you walk out of the consult and you have no freaking clue where you're going in the case and when things should happen from a timeline perspective, like we have packets that give that information and talk about when things should happen if they're on pace.
We have a process guide.
We have a process guide. Like I don't hide how the soup's made at all.
Right.
So when we look at the temporary orders, the discovery, the mediation, the trial, I keep beating that dead horse, but there's a reason for beating that dead horse. Those are in your pretrial scheduling order, which lays out your timelines and your deadlines. So if you compartmentalize those, now you can start to budget and compartmentalize each step. And I think that if they're not doing that, the best question to ask is, well, when are we going to have this done? When should we shoot for discovery? And things get moved. I've had 10 trials this year that were supposed to go this year that literally the judge just goes, no, not doing it. All new set of timelines. And the client thinks, well, oh my gosh, the world is coming to an end. No, we've gotten past the temporary orders. We like the temporary orders, or we would appeal them. We've gotten to the discovery, and all we're doing now is just updating that. And it's all organized in a portal. We've been to mediation, maybe or maybe not. And the courts now, because the courts pushed the trial date back so long, maybe that extra Tuesday is not quite as important. And so we have the ability to be nimble and agile, to your point. The last thing I'll say is that the bills, if your attorney is not giving you bills inside of every month and they don't clearly explain, and it should be broken out by it's required, but some people don't do it this way. It should be broken out by the paralegal doing the work or the lawyer doing the work. I can't tell you the last time I've touched a keyboard to draft a pleading, right? What? Yeah, no, I don't do that, right? I have teams that's all they do. So if you don't have on the bill broken out specifically what it is, and when you have a conversation with an attorney or a paralegal, I'm real big on our team saying next steps, right? So there's a calendared next step. The ball gets kicked back into the client's court to do X, Y, or Z. Then it goes on our calendar. Then it goes on the bill, and it explains what we talked about. And even with hearings, I'll talk about the why or what the person was asking in the bill. So it might be a little bit longer paragraph just to remind you, hey, this person was asking for you to get booted out of the house and give you $2,000 a month. You got 20, right? Mm-hmm. So they didn't want to give you anything, right? So you need to constantly be having those
and ask
those
questions again.
reinforced.
Same when you get the invoice and you see something on there that you don't understand,
Ask it.
Because if I see on there, for example, I was billed for the attorney drafting something and I was billed for the paralegal the same thing, or it just says drafting, then find out what it was, because lawyers make mistakes
too. Look at your bills. We make mistakes. Okay, so I have like 5 or 6 Davises at one time. My billing input goes in on my phone. I have these little fingers that I use this little phone for. Sometimes, and I know this is hard to believe, but sometimes I'll click the wrong Davis. That doesn't mean fire your lawyer. It means, hey, and it very seldomly happens because we are very careful, but it does happen, especially when you've got newer staff or newer team members.
But we have we have.
Hell, I do it, okay? And I've been doing this a long time.
But again, in a real team, which we have somebody, in our case, it's the office manager,
Checks and balances,
that looks over every bill and even then goes to the attorney or the paralegal and says like, hey, I see this on here twice. Was by accident, it may be a different pleading, or did you by accident both call the client, or did you both call the client because it was a different date, you put the wrong date in there? There's checks and balances, so it shouldn't, in our case, you might enter it, but Carrie catches it, and then she's going to update the bill and say, well, that makes no sense unless it's not catchable because...
And look, I don't want people to think like, whoa, they're just throwing things down.
No.
When I say it's very rare, I mean once in 3 or 4 years type of thing.
But as a client, I need to understand what they're even billing me for, because then again, there's a frustration. I don't understand the process. Now I'm seeing all the stuff on my invoice. My trust account is going down.
Mm-hmm.
I have no more money in there. They're asking me for more money, and I don't even understand what they're billing me for. So I cannot respond and potentially say. And here's a thing that I think I want to mention too. There's always a way, and you do that, which I think is a cool thing. There's always a way to get a third opinion. Because what you do now too is be a consultant, maybe the third party, meaning I already have an attorney. My ex-wife, my ex-husband or future ex-husband, future ex-wife has an attorney. But I'm not sure whether my attorney is actually doing the right thing because I don't really understand or don't want to ask. Then you can bring a third party in. I can have somebody out there, like Justin and other people probably out doing the same thing. Bring him in and say, can you please take a look at my case? So I might spend
It's like a general contractor
right,
with
spend
with the
$1,000 or $2,000, whatever.
There's a reason you have a general contractor and a builder and an architect.
And so I can have a third opinion, and then you might say they're doing everything by the book, is everything correct? You just didn't understand the process, or well, there's some other strategy we can do here, or this might not be okay, and then you get an opinion. So don't feel that you are at the mercy of your attorney. You're not, and if you're not happy with your attorney, you can change attorneys. I think a lot of people don't even know. Throughout your case, you can change your attorney. You're not tied to them.
Right. Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't understand that.
That's a huge point. And I mean, this works against us and for us, right? So this is not a, hey, switch your attorney kind of comment. I have said many times that it's like a bad dentist, right? You feel like they've got their hands in your mouth and they've got your file or an accountant or whatever else. And the concept of switching is impossible because my new person will never be able to figure this out.
Like changing bank accounts, the same thing. I'm not going to change bank
accounts. Get that out of your damn head. There is no question to what we can get up to speed. Any good attorney can get up to speed in very short form. We may not be able to capture all the money that you've spent or lost based on bad work back. And sometimes we're batting cleanup. Now, if you're switching 3 and 4 lawyers, we ain't your people, right? But keep in mind this switching piece, or the thing that you need to think about there is, if I'm going to make a move and I do a consult, I look at that. I'm like, I had a client call 2 days ago, and she was like, "Well, I want to hire you," and I said, "Great. Your hearing's on Wednesday." No. What do you mean no? No. There's nothing else to say about it. So it's understanding the value of what you're doing and creating the time to get it matched up with what the client needs to do. And then also when it comes to just the day-to-day payment of bills, my biggest pet peeve is when a client calls, and I know that they're frustrated, but they're like, Well, I don't feel like anything was done on my case. And I mean, those people, I get like one or two of those a year, and I'm sure they're the same people that go to the hotel that had like a awesome bed and their pillow sucked and everything else. But the reality of that is, if you have a question about your invoice, a good lawyer's, they're trying to expand their business, and they're trying to create a brand image and a recognition and a referral base. They want to talk to you about an issue with an invoice, okay? And if they don't, obviously run. But if they're going to sit down and go, hey, this piece of this doesn't really make sense or didn't move the needle. I wipe $200 or $300 off people's bills all the time because they just felt bad about a conversation they had with a paralegal. So what? Okay. What I don't like is clients feeling like, well, I didn't get the result that I wanted as a whole. A lot of times due to their own action, and sometimes due to the lawyer, right? And so,
but not always. It can also be the judge. I mean,
or the judge, or the bed that they woke up on, or the way the moon aligned with the stars. I don't know what the hell causes it, right? I like to think we win everything, but we don't. But what I do know is when you're in those situations and you call an attorney and say, hey, I don't like my billing. Nothing was done on my case. I immediately go, okay, well, tell me what issue you had with your billing. And they go, well, I don't know. How can you expect me to do that? Right? I said, well, the answer is if you feel like we did something in error, I will fix an error all day long. If you feel like you didn't get a result, I will look at the result and I will be objective and look at the entire situation. But I'm going to push back on you and challenge you, because what we do is sell advice. And if you didn't take the advice, or maybe you didn't, stop doing drugs, and all of a sudden we had 3 more hearings and it got a little more expensive, there's a lot of things that can happen. So just be very, very realistic about what you're doing and compartmentalize it. Like Andrea said, don't ever hesitate to have a second set of eyes on it. And then don't be afraid to cut bait. Now, don't wait until the trial date, or don't wait till the day before the hearing to cut bait either, right?
And a good attorney will actually welcome a third thing, because if the client constantly complains and now there is a different opinion, and the third party tells you your attorney is doing everything by the book, well, that confirms that I, as an attorney, do a good job, so that I should actually want that.
Well, and people think they really think I run around hanging out with family lawyers. I don't. I don't hang out with a single family lawyer, not one. Not because I don't want to. It's just they're just not in my circle. So I have never ever gotten on this boat of kicking some other lawyer because it's not our business. In fact, you will very seldomly see me ever say anything negative about another attorney. But I would definitely, if I see some egregious billing or what they're doing sucks, and I'm just like, no, that's not what I would do. I explain how I would do it differently, and then explain to them about what my costs would be. So that's my check on some other person in the industry that's either charging too much or not doing any work not doing enough, right? And that's my check, is just being able to say what we do different. And, I think that's where it comes into play on the consulting side.
So just to kind of encapsulate a few of these last questions here. Ooh. Well, we want to talk about the fact that you get what you pay for. We kind of talked about that. And then that you should really, when you're looking at different attorneys, you really should be comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. So any tips to help people figure that out? Yes.
So the number one, the attorney who wants to be the person on the phone with you all the time at every stage, okay, be cautious of that, because that bill can get out of control inside of the first 2 or 3 months. And I've seen firms that literally their business is built around the first 2 or 3 months, okay?
When the emotions run the highest.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I have a client calling us 50 times a day, I'm not saying, hey, stop calling me. I'm saying, get your thoughts organized, right? Get it into a summary timeline, and let's meet about it where we can have a quality session to go through your concerns. If you're firing off an email every 12 minutes, you're getting billed 0.25 or whatever the increment is to answer and respond. And a lawyer has a legal duty to respond. And there are clients out there, I know people may not believe this, that are kind of nutty, okay? They do things in life, and the reason they're in certain situations is because that's how they approach all of life. Everything, that's a very half-empty approach. And so when they get to the billing stage of it, well, that's a problem. And then the attorney who built it was a problem. So I would encourage people, number one, to get their thoughts organized and get those stored up for a meeting instead of firing off a bunch of emails. I would make sure that the attorney that's billing when I look at how many hours I build for the year, now I do a lot of management and case strategy and all that, which doesn't go on the bill. But I don't want to be on the phone all day long with people talking about things that don't move the needle. I want to move the needle for people. So, when you're in the middle of that that situation, you have to know the cost per hour when you're comparing apples to apples. Back to your point, the cost per hour is not always the critical thing. It's the value per the
interaction,
the interaction, right? So if I bill $600 an hour and Joe Blow bills $300 an hour, but Joe Blow is charging every time they're doing any kind of letter back and forth or email, they can get up to $800 an hour real quick. Okay, and if I've got a paralegal billing at $195 an hour, and 90% of the stuff that goes back and forth is done like that, well, that makes more sense for the value of the process for the client. So don't get married to cost per hour. Also, don't like the $1,000 per hour. Really understand what you're getting there, right? I mean, I'd love to be able to charge $1,000 an hour, and certainly, there's days where I think I'm worth it, but most people would disagree. And no disrespect to the people that charge it. It's just there's like outliers in everything, and it's county specific and it's task specific, and so I just think you look at all of it.
And I think like the apples and oranges, like you said, you need to really compare it, like we said earlier, ask the steps. So this is how much are you charging me per hour? How much are you approximately charging me for each step? What is the overall? Because we talk about how attorneys are so shady about not giving you an estimate. You need to ask that. Like understand what a retainer is, understand what additional costs come up, understand the different steps, which is your homework beforehand. And then you can really compare.
Yeah,
and compare somebody.
I hate the notion that attorneys have gotten this stigma about them about overbilling or billing for things that are dumb. Like, I don't want to project that amongst our listeners, because most attorneys do it inside the fairway, even if clients disagree. Okay, most. The outliers I have seen are like, I don't even know how they do it. I mean, I've got 6 or 7 lawyers and 7 or 8 support staff that bill a decent amount in a given week. And if they billed every hour of the day for their entire career of that year, they couldn't get to what some of the legal fees are for a onesie-twosie shop. And I don't know how you do that, because it's a numbers game.
Right.
And I run a business. And they are expected to bill. So just be cognizant of that when you see the God's gift to the earth attorney that is going to bill you $200,000 to do whatever it is they say they did.
All right. Any other final thoughts from either one of you guys?
Legal fees, like you lower the legal fees if you have other people to talk to than your attorney. We've said this many times before. Your attorney is not your counselor. So when you reach out to an attorney, you talked about not every 12 minutes an email, but also make sure that all the emotional stuff is handled somewhere else with a counselor. That get that out the way. So when you talk to your attorney, you talk facts and strategy and only about that, and don't get upset. And again, it's very emotional, especially the first several months is very emotional. But you need some help and some guidance and some support. But the attorney
Last apples to apples, and I'll be quiet.
Yeah.
If you have, oftentimes in divorce cases or custody cases, one side of the case is more expensive than the other. And the reason for that is one party is getting all the information together, or one party is asking for the most relief, right? Or one party does some really dumb stuff. So when I hear, well, they only spent $10,000 or $5,000 on this, and I spent $22,000, and I'm like, yes, you did meth, or whatever the case may be, or you don't have any of the documentation. We had to go get an expert to trace that you spent a bunch of money on an adulterous situation. Like, there's things that come up that create inequalities in attorney's fees. So apples to apples is your fact circumstance to your specific fact pattern in real time compared to no one else. But definitely you can go get somebody else who is a consulting attorney, or just somebody to lay a set of eyes on it. And also be cognizant, they may be trying to get a case too, so really understand what their process would have been and what it would have cost, and then you'll have a good measurement.
Okay. Well, that's great. That's a great place to wrap up. So if you would like to speak to Attorney Justin Sisemore's law firm, the Sisemore Law Firm, you can contact the firm at 817-336-4444 or visit lawyerdfw.com. We also invite you to follow the podcast and share it with others who you might think would find it interesting. Thanks so much for listening in, and have a great day.